And then the whole book is premised on the adoption of a thing called the GBS construct. And we're going to develop the thinking around that construct as we go through the series of webcasts. And I just wondered if you could comment, but either or both of you, on what does this mean to you in practice?
Yeah, I'm actually gonna say something I think is really funny because Robert, when you talked about GBS as a function, here at McDonald's, we deliberately have GBS as one of our four operating segments. And it was with the CEO, it was done in a very deliberate way. So there's a real reason why we don't call GBS a function. And it is internally at parity with our US business, our international business, etc. It is to really recognize that GBS is the only part of the organization that really cuts across the whole enterprise. It's not, it's an umbrella over the functions, not hierarchically speaking, but in its ability to truly stitch together different components of the company. So I do think when Robert and I start discussing this, Tim and everyone, we were very much like, is GBS an organization? Can you touch it? But then there's so many, to your point, when you ask 10 executives what GBS is, you get 20
Yeah,
different answers, right?
yeah, yeah.
And I think we really quickly pivoted on the idea that GBS is more of a framework, a mindset, a construct that has certain things you can point at that makes it a GBS. So it's not like completely, we didn't want to be too abstract, but the way how you typically we go into like how many hubs you have, etc. But it actually doesn't matter for you to be called GBS. So construct is more, it gives you a little bit of intellectual freedom to, that's okay to define your version of a GBS differently than other companies. But there are certain things that are must-haves if you want to be seen as having an impact that a GBS construct can make.
And maybe just to build on that, there's a few things that we said you can sort of use to identify if there's a GBS in play in an organization, right? And one of the things is that there's sort of an open market model where the way that the operations are performed is not purely functionally siloed. It's not just order taking, but it's really an open market model. Second, I think, as Mattijs already said, a GBS construct typically goes across geographies, goes across business unit, goes across functions. So it really is that enterprise-wide setup. And third, typically a GBS construct is busy with end-to-end process, is busy with standardization, is busy with a consistent deployment of skills and capabilities across the enterprise. These are sort of ways you always find with the GBS contract. However, the exact organizational diagram is then drawn.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so sorry,
Yeah,
Matthias.
and I think Kiara asked a great question, right? So I'm sure that for many of you, this is a never-ending debate. So at McDonald's, given our inexperience in this a couple of years back, we did start calling it GBS. But it's interesting because within what we call GBS, there's the whole data analytics AI organization. There is the whole transformation organization sits in there. Like it's a much broader cut than your typical less mature GBS where you have a data officer that sits outside, or you have components of technology, or you have components of a parallel transformation, enterprise transformation organization. So we did brand it as GBS, but we are also coming to the conclusion that that creates more challenges than it actually helps because people see GBS more as an operating concept. It's a shared services in some shape or form, whereby at McDonald's, it's much more than a shared services, which kind of proves the point that GBS is a construct. But I did love it that you call it out and say, well, then what you call it, and we
Yeah.
actually call it GBS, right? It just shows you it shows you the challenge, quite frankly, with branding, because finance is finance. And even though some might include procurement or some might like there's different ways how companies organize a finance function. When you say finance, everybody immediately understands what's in there. I think in GBS, it requires three follow-up questions, which is why Robert and I were very clear that you know, okay, we call it at McDonald's GBS, but we could call it anything, quite frankly, depending on what resonates with a company. But to Robert's point about what makes GBS unique, all of those things do apply to McDonald's.
That's it's an interesting conversation, and I was reminded when you started out there talking about not being a function, that in transparency, I and Kira, in fact, used to work for Robert at Novartis, and we were running the services organization for data and analytics and other commercial and scientific functions. And we said this is not a function because we carry with us different skill sets and motivations than a function. And it's the skill set and motivations of improvement and of KPI bit driven and of design and various other things are different, I think, from a traditional function. So the conversation really resonates for me on that level.